Greetings to everyone world over, all our brothers and sisters across the globe. Wherever you are, we extend you a very warm welcome, hearty welcome. It's indeed a great pleasure to have another evening with the wonderful August, gathering of our brothers and sisters because our chamber focuses on non-resident Indians quite a bit. And when we brought in 2003 the Pravasi Bharati Divas to India, and before that, basically, we built up the cloud of the tourism, hospitality, and the youth coming up in the right direction when Ministry of Tourism, Government of India sets up its own hotel management institutes and travel and tourism programs in different cities and different places. And then it seeped into universities and colleges as well. This particular journey we have taken because we want to bring awareness what kind of a career opportunities are available for our youth, how they can grow with the service industry, and particularly when you talk about hospitality industry, because today's distinguished guest, Mr. Aman Malhotra, is the chief financial officer at the Catron Hospitality based out of Dubai. We extend him a very warm welcome. It's a pleasure to have him as a part of 108 Zoom sessions because किसी भी माला में 108 मन के होते हैं, रुद्राक्ष होते हैं और वो सब पिरोए जाते हैं. So we are touching policy, the planning, the marketing, the strategy, the human resource development, the skills, the competencies, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, the top of the shelf is finances because you need money to turn your ideas into ideation or reality, your dreams into reality, whatever you want to do. Because if you can manage your finances well, you can grow, you can really prosper. Because many times people say earning is easy, but maintaining that earn and having the flow with the growth is something very important, which one has to take into consideration. So, on behalf of Chamber for Service Industry, on behalf of our entire team, and on behalf of all our friends, we extend a very warm welcome. Join me in extending the warmth and getting this evening with us Mr. Aman Malhotra, the CFO, Catron Hospitality, to share his vision. I would request him to give a little profile of his own. Thereafter, he should talk about his organization, and then we'll move with the journey forward. Hearty welcome, pleasure to have. And today is the Labor Day, very important day world over. We talk about 1st of May,
Exactly.
how it started in 1886. So that part also is the story where the struggle and strength goes together. Mr. Aman Malhotra.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Gulshan. It is actually an honor to be speaking to you and our distinguished guests here. It's really great to share whatever insights, whatever experience I've had so far in my career with people in the industry and contributing to the growth of this industry, which is actually one of the most important industries, especially when it comes to generation of employment and contribution to the GDP of the country. So thank you very much for first giving my brief introduction. Let me just extend on what you said. So I started my journey in hospitality dates back to around 2008. I'm a chartered accountant by qualification. But when I was doing my chartered accountancy during the last year of my articleship, I had an option of doing an industrial training, and that's where I was exposed to hospitality. So I started my industrial training with the Oberoi's in my hometown. I belong to Shimla, so I started off my journey in the hotels when I joined the Wildflower Hall in Shimla as an industrial trainee. And that's where I got introduced to hospitality. And besides the glamour of hospitality that we all see, at the front of the house, what really got me in and what really attracted me towards this industry was the versatility or the different aspects of your knowledge that you can actually implement in this industry. And that's what really amused me a lot and kept me going in this industry. Now I've been with the industry for more than 15 years. So from Oberoi's, then I moved to ITC. I initially started off being part of the audit team. And then I moved to one of the hotels in Hyderabad where I started working in the operations. From there, I moved to Bangalore. I moved to Marriott, opened the first Ritz-Carlton in India. That was a very proud moment because that was the first Ritz-Carlton bringing the culture of the company, bringing a new brand into the country. That was something which was really a great and a wonderful journey that we had. So I was with Ritz-Carlton in Bangalore till 2018, and then I moved on for my first international assignment. I moved to Bangkok, where I was handling a couple of hotels. One was a Marriott hotel and one was a Marriott executive apartment as a multi-property director of finance. I was there for close to around a little more than 3 years, actually. From there, I moved to Doha, where we were actually getting ready for the FIFA World Cup. Everybody knows that one of
Yes.
the biggest events that we had in Doha was the FIFA World Cup. So I was given this responsibility of a cluster of 8 properties there, all Marriott properties. 3 of those properties were already operational when I joined, and the other 5 were supposed to open for the World Cup specifically. So we worked hard day, night, got those properties open, and we successfully managed through the World Cup, and we really that was another wonderful experience. And besides the hotels, we were also the caterers for the FIFA Fan Festival, which is the only official and the biggest fan festival that's there whenever FIFA happens. And the scale of FIFA would be like every day we were actually welcoming around 100,000, around 1 lakh guests every single day. So that was the scale at which we worked. From there, I moved to my current role, which is the Chief Financial Officer at Curtain Hospitality. It was a very different decision, or a very challenging decision to leave something like a Marriott and then moving on to a company that's just been a few years old. But it was, I mean, I looked at the history of the company, which I'll share in brief. And today I've just completed like 1 year in this company, and I have really, I can say, I mean, today I can say that I've made one of the best decisions of moving into this company. So talking about Curtain Hospitality, we are a mixed use operator. We're mainly lifestyle operators. We mainly specialize in managing hotels. We specialize in managing serviced office spaces. We have a few F&B brands. We also have a gelato brand of our own, where we produce and sell. Most of our properties are based out of the Middle East and Europe right now. So we have operating assets in Saudi Arabia. We have operating assets in Turkey. We have operating assets in Kuwait. We have got assets in Georgia. And we have got assets in Jordan. So these are the operating assets that we have. But when you talk about the pipeline, we have got a really strong pipeline with us, and we've got assets which will actually end up being in more than 10 countries. We've got around 57 plus projects that we have signed. So the company is growing, and one of the reasons why the company is growing is because the way we deliver our projects. We take every project, since we are in lifestyle, every property that we operate, every property that we get engaged with, we curate bespoke experiences for them. So that's what stands, what sets us apart from the competition, that we actually get involved in every aspect of that property. We look at the strengths and then work on those strengths to make the USP of that property. So that's Curtain Hospitality for you, and that's a bit about my brief profile.
And heartiest congratulations, you complete 1 year today.
Yes, thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Yeah, it's been a memorable journey. It's actually been a memorable journey. So yeah, so that's a brief about the company and myself. Now, talking about finance, you rightly said that, at the end of the day, finance, I mean, without praising the function that I work for, or I've been working for last 15 years, at the end of the day, it's a business, and business means money besides all the other things that it achieves, be it employment, be it social support, be it ESG, be it contribution to the GDP, anything that you talk about, at the end of the day, you need money to churn that. So that's the most critical part of it. And when you invest in business, what you really need is you need the business to generate returns for you. And that's the first key role that the finance department plays in this industry. So when we talk about hospitality in specific, hospitality is a very capital intensive sector. It's to set up a hotel, you really need high investment. So when you need high investment, which means that there's a lot of money involved, sourcing those funds, looking at the right decisions on where the property should be located, whether that property should be a 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, 5-star deluxe. That's another decision that you need to take. What should be your mix in terms of rooms, food and beverage, other revenue, other experiences? These are the other decisions that will decide your future cost structure, that will decide your future streams of revenue. So there are a lot of these decisions that need to be taken at the inception of a property. And that's exactly where the role of finance begins. It's not just related to the operations of a hotel once it starts operating, but the role of finance would actually begin at that level where a property is being conceptualized. You're thinking about a property right from that first step where it's all greenfield. The role of finance would come in. What's also equally important is that it's not just about the initial investment that we do in hospitality that matters. Even when you look at the cost structure of hotels, once it starts operating, it does need a lot of resources, unlike a few other industries that we have, which are also contributing to the growth of the country. But this industry also needs a lot of fueling of capital when it starts operations. Like, to give you an example, the two key expenses or two major expenses that we have in hospitality are payroll and utilities. Now, when you look at both of those expenses, they are more or less fixed in nature, which means once you've committed to them, it will be very difficult for you to reduce if your business level goes down. Increase, of course, I mean, we can increase expenses at any point in time, but for you to reduce the expenses to mirror what is really needed as per the business levels, it will be a very difficult decision. And we've all seen that during the COVID times. I mean, I still remember. So during COVID, I was actually in Bangkok. And when we started talking about cost rationalization, when we started talking about how we can reduce the cost, it's actually a big task, because most of your costs that you get associated with are fixed in hospitality. Yes, there are cost of sales, like, for example, food and beverage. You really don't need to incur the ingredient cost unless you're actually cooking something. But again, even in food and beverage, something that is at par with the cost of sales is the payroll cost. And payroll cost, again, becomes a fixed expense. So we were deliberating on how we can actually bring the costs down. And it took a lot of effort for us to actually rationalize the cost to align to the business levels. And I still remember, so when we were in that property, the complex of properties that I was working with, I was officiating at that time as the general manager of the hotel. So I was the director of finance, but I was also given additional responsibility of managing the entire hotel. And that's where we started looking at how we can run this business in order to, one, minimize the losses, because what was really limited was the revenue because of the restrictions that were in place of on account of COVID. You really had a very limited avenue to increase revenue, and that was not completely in your part. But then what you could actually do is you could actually reflect your expenses to rationalize and bring them down in order to make sure that your expenses are reduced, and so is your loss. And that's where we started strategizing. We started involving other departments to see what are the avenues that we can cut down without actually impacting. And at the same time, when you're operating a hotel during COVID times, what you really cannot compromise on is cleanliness. You cannot compromise on spending on all those things. So it was a very tricky situation where you had to balance between what costs you incur to keep your business going, how much revenue you generate, what costs you can rationalize. And that's where finance role came in really strong, that you had to analyze. And that's what finance brings to the table, that they can look at the numbers and they can look at the rationale behind the numbers, and they can also advise what really needs to be done in order for you to operate your business or run your business successfully. Every business aspires to make profit, but when we are in a situation like COVID, what you really need to do is you need to minimize your losses, because you know that it'll be difficult for you to generate profit, but then at least you can minimize losses. And that's where the finance role comes in. And even once we have gone beyond COVID, what has really happened, and this is something that we've experienced all around, not just in UAE, not just in Saudi. I was in India last month, and I was looking at the prices. We all have experienced that the prices of almost all ingredients, all components of hospitality have gone up by at least 2 to 3 times. You talk about food supplies, even when you talk about payroll, the payroll also has increased. Utility cost has increased. So there are costs which are continuously, consistently going up. So for you to keep pace with those increase in cost and making sure that the margins are protected, that's where finance comes in. So that's one of the most important role that finance plays. And if you're talking about how the industry would grow, all the way till 2047, what's most important is that we get maximized returns out of the investments that people are doing, right? Any industry, there are two major factors that drive the inflow of funds to that industry. One is that, what is the domestic investment coming in for that industry, which already is happening in India. But in addition to that, we also need to look at how the foreign money is getting attracted to the country in order to prosper, in order to grow the industry size, in order to generate more revenue from this industry. Now, when you talk about that, what the foreign investors would look at is what is the return that they're getting. I'm sure that even the domestic investors have the same outlook, but obviously domestic investors will have an appetite of a longer tenure because they belong to the country, they invest in the real estate, at least they have an asset under their belt. But when you talk about people coming in from the overseas and investing, they also need to see a quicker return, because besides turning around that, a lot of it also depends on the policy parameters. Today, the policies are favorable to foreign investors. Tomorrow, the policies may be even better or may not be even better. So in that case, the major outlook that the foreign investor has is that, what am I getting out of this asset and how quickly can I recover my investment? And that's where our role comes in as finance, that we manage to maximize the yield for the investor, whether it is a domestic investor or it's it's a foreign investor. At the end of the day, what percentage of capital employed is being returned to the investor is what will actually matter in terms of flowing in more funds into this industry. And that's where our role comes in. Then moving on to the operations, the other important aspect that we as finance people can contribute is performance analysis. Today is the age of technology. Today is the age of data. I think if you look at the top companies internationally, any company that has data under their belt is really flourishing well. That's where the money is right now. So data
data is the new oil. People
exactly
call it as the new oil.
Exactly.
Yes,
So data is in fact the new oil. So you rightly said, absolutely. And that's where our role comes in, that for us to analyze the performance at the time of inception itself, we need to be very clear. And this is something that we do in hospitality, right? Whenever we set up a hotel, the first thing that we do is we look at the end result, right? For example, what are the reports that we need to see that will help us assess where are we lagging, where are we gaining, what do we need to focus on, what do we need to eliminate in order for us to improve our margins or keep them consistent so that there is adequate return on capital employed. Now, when we have that in front of us, when we think about the end result, what is the kind of report that we need to see, then we need to work backwards on what is the data that is required to give us that analysis, give us those reports. That's the second back step. Then we go further back and we see that for these this data, what do we need to capture at the first stage of information so that we get this data. So that's the other thing where we contribute, that what exactly needs to be captured at what level of service so that we get this data. I mean, so for example, if I'm talking about hospitality, there are a lot of important parameters that you need to see. You need to first see that, what are different sources of revenue that you're getting, whether you're getting your transient business, which is your retail business. Is your business coming in from there, or is your business coming in from the groups? Is your business coming in from the wholesalers? Is your business coming in from online travel agents? So what exactly is the key source feeding your revenue? So that's how you need to plan your MIS. That's how you need to then go back and decide your data hierarchy. That's where it needs to be captured. And then you talk about the applications, you talk about the softwares that you will be implementing that can actually cater to that kind of a data request. So once you've envisioned all of this, then you need to start working backwards on the implementation part. Today, you've got a lot of choices in terms of the application. You've got Oracle giving you Opera, Micros, or Symphony, as we call the latest edition. You have Infrasys, which is another point of sale. When you talk about materials management, there are a lot of softwares that come for the materials management. When you talk about sales and catering, there are a lot of applications which are available there. So that's now, once you have the end vision in mind, that what do you want to generate out of your MIS, that's where you start working backwards, and you see that what are the applications that actually satisfy your requirement. Once you've done that, then you go to the commercials and you understand that for my size of the property, for the kind of revenues that I'm expecting from my property, what would be financially prudent for me to opt? Because you have software starting from probably 10,000 rupees to around 10 lakh rupees a year. But what exactly do you need? What fits into your budget? And what actually gives you the kind of results that you want to get out of your MIS system is something that we come in handy with. So we have that expertise where we can actually assess all these applications depending on the size, location, complexity of operation. We can actually assess. Now, things as small as food and beverage controls, that also has a module in today's software world, that you've got certain applications that specifically tell you that if you're selling 1,000 items in your restaurant, what items are really key performers, what items are something that you should actually eliminate from your menu because they're sitting in the menu, which means you'll have to hold inventory for preparing those items, but they're not yielding revenue for you. At the end of the day, if there's something sitting in your menu, you have to have the stock for preparing that if an order comes in. But if you have not seen an order coming in last 1 week, 10 days, 1 month, and that has been the trend that you've seen, you end up getting 1 orders, 2 orders, 3 orders a month, there's no point of holding that stock in the inventory for that item, right? So you would probably think of discontinuing such product. So these are the analysis that you would actually think of when you're deciding on the cost parameters. And that's why it's very important that the applications that you're choosing, the data crunching that's happening at the background, you've chosen the right set of applications. And at the same time, you've also configured the entire data well. Today's the day of artificial intelligence, we all know, right? That's become the most important thing. And for us to really cope up with that AI requirement, what's most important is, because AI feeds on data, and if your data is not structured, it will be useless. It will not give you any concrete information based on which you can take decision. So for you to have enough information through that AI crunching, where you can actually take decisions on where you need to put your money in, what you really need to focus on, it's very important that the data is set up in a proper way, it's recorded in a proper way, it's analyzed in a proper way, and that's what gets fed into the AI, so that your decision making becomes much better than your competitors' decision making, and that gives you an edge in the industry. So that's the other aspect that we have. Then talking about risk management, as the industry grows, we know that there are a lot of risks that come into picture. We in finance, we also specialize in various insurance products. We know that for a hotel, what are the imminent risks, or what are the risks that we can see which we need to cover. So when we talk about risks in a hotel, there are mainly commercial and general liability risks, because we're running an operation. We always have a risk towards the third party. We get cases in hotels where, if somebody gets injured, food poisoning is one common thing that happens, especially when you talk about food and beverage industry. So food poisoning is another potential risk that you have. So how do we cover those risks? Because that one risk can actually completely eliminate your profit for the entire year if it becomes serious. So that's why it's very important for every finance professional to assess the risk profile of the business and ensure that anything that can be covered under insurance gets covered under insurance. So actually, this is something that we in India have started picking up now. The insurance industry, the relevance of insurance has really become an important aspect in the Indian business scenario right now, which probably wasn't the case if we rewind, say, around 20 years back. I mean, insurance was looked more as a cost than as a support for the business. But today, when we actually see business, it's a very important aspect of business, and it's not just the commercial and general liability. It's also about the asset insurance, the business all risk policy that we have, where we secure the asset. Like I said initially, that business in hospitality is very capital intensive. So for us to secure that asset and make sure that any exposure that we have in terms of, let us say, floods, let us say earthquake, let us say a terrorism attack, all of that is covered under our insurance. So that's why it's very important for us to assess the risk profile and make sure that we have enough coverage for all those risks which might be there. We also have something like a business interruption policy, and that's something where you get involved, that when you're talking about a business, let us say, God forbid, something happens to the hotel and the hotel is shut for 2 months, 3 months, 1 year, you never know, right? Depending on how extreme is the damage to that business. Now what happens is that during that time, you've shut your business, which means it's not just the asset that you've lost, you've also lost the opportunity of making profit during that time. So that's where your business interruption policy comes into play, that during that time, if you've actually lost profit, you can gain, or at least you can recover that from the insurance. And again, when we talk about insurance premiums, it's a very small percentage, but the kind of peace of mind that it gives you, the kind of coverage that it gives you from the exposure, it's immense. And that's where we generally consider insurance as a very key ingredient to a business. It's not a cost on the P&L, it's more a business support system that we have, right? And that's where, again, finance comes into picture, because we understand all of this. And again, if we're talking about 2047, that's almost like 23 years from now. I'm sure that if you look at the history, there have been incidents every now and then, and assuming that nothing will happen from now until 2047 will be actually probably a very, very, very optimistic approach. So that's why, for us to ensure that things run smoothly in the business, that also becomes a critical decision for us, right? Then if I move to compliance and regulation, we all know that how complex it is for hospitality to operate. The number of licenses which are required to operate a hotel, you talk about the food licenses, you talk about the municipality, you talk about the labor licenses, you talk about the tax laws, and I'll thank goodness to GST. I still remember when we implemented GST. I was in India at that time. And when we were implementing GST, you won't believe that we started working on the GST implementation today. We had 36 hours of non-stop work. And at the 36th hour, which means we rung a full day, and then 12 hours into the next day, we managed to finish the entire thing, because it was implemented. Imagine, it was in the middle of the year. On day one, you have to run your entire systems based on the old tax regime. Yeah. On day two, it has to automatically switch to a new tax regime, which means all your transaction codes, everything that you're reporting needs to be aligned so that it completely gels with the tax regime on day one. It completely aligns with the tax regime on day two. So for 36 continuous hours, me and my entire team, we were working on implementing a GST. But that was an experience. But I'll share something else which is interesting with you. I remember, so back then, I mean, I'm talking about pre-GST. In the pre-GST era, the pastry shop in hotels, pastry was considered as manufacturing. So we all know hotel is a service industry, right? And then the food and beverage that we sell in hotels, besides being a service by the local state governments, was also considered as sale of goods, because at the end of the day, you're selling an item, so it attracts VAT. And because it's a service, as per the central government, it attracts service tax in that regime. Then, because the pastry was considered as manufacturing, even the excise duty came into picture. So imagine you bought a pastry from a pastry shop in a 5-star, which was, let us say, 150 rupees back then. Now, I mean, last time when I came, there was no pastry less than 500 rupees. But back then, let us say the pastry was 150 rupees. And then you started off the taxes, right? So 150 rupees for a pastry. Then you had the service tax. Then you had the primary and secondary education cess. Then you had the VAT. Then you had the excise duty. Then you had the cesses on the excise duty. So one line of pastry had at least around six or seven lines of taxes after that. So the percentage, of course, was, what I think when you added up everything together, you would probably pay around 25, 28% taxes. But the number of line items that were there, it was unbelievable for such a small item. And, yeah, pastry, cookie was even worse, because at least pastry was 150 rupees. Cookie was probably, if you pick up a cookie from a 5-star, it was around 40, 50 rupees, but the line items were the same. And thank goodness to GST, now it's only, CGST, SGST, that's it. But otherwise it was so complicated. And that's where we again come into picture, because right now, even though taxes have been simplified, but the compliance required, that's where we come in. And what businesses don't want right now is to have a non-compliance in any of the taxes. And especially at finance, we understand all the legal requirements. I mean, we are not an expert in legal requirements, but when you talk about licenses over a period of time, we understand, what are the licenses which are required from hospitality. And one good thing that we finance people generally do is that we are good in tracking things. So with licenses, what you really need is that you track them down properly. You have a schedule of when a tax is to be paid, when a return is to be filed, when a license is to be renewed, what are the details required for licenses. So we can actually come in handy even for the compliance and regulatory framework, or the compliances in hospitality for that. And then moving on to the strategic decision making, that's another thing that I've touched upon briefly, and that's where we come in handy. So finance plays a very key role in decision making. When I talk about my career history, I made more friends in operations than in finance all along. The reason is that I learn from them, they learn from me. So when we talk about operations, let us say there are a lot of director of rooms who would come to me and they would ask that, my budget is this much. I'm not able to meet my budgeted profitability. I'm not able to meet my budgeted expense. What can I do to make sure that, I'm within the limits? And that's where our analysis comes in, and we help each and every operation. Like I was giving you an example of food and beverage. If I'm sitting with the director of food and beverage, I can tell him that, I can look at the reports, I can analyze, and I can tell him that this is what you should push more. This is where you probably have a scope of increasing the prices. This is where you should probably look at reducing the prices because you have enough margin and the item is in demand. If you reduce the price, probably your demand will pick up. All those trials in the industry we can do, because something just clicks and you start making more profit. So there are a lot of areas where we can actually contribute as finance into operations, and that's where our strategic decision making comes in handy. That when we look at business, finance, besides a few other departments, is one department which looks at the holistic business. When we look at the P&L, we're not looking at rooms, we're not looking at food and beverage, we're not looking at sales and marketing, we're not looking at utilities, we're not looking at repair and maintenance. We are looking at how the business performed in the previous period or in this period. So what we are looking at is a holistic scenario. So we're looking at all aspects of business. We know what engines are firing, we know what engines are failing, and we know where to put money, we know where to reduce money. All of that we can do, right? And especially with operations, what happens is that today is the day of is the era of experiences. There are a lot of hotels which are really focused on experiences. Hotel is a product. You get decent rooms almost everywhere these days. Even if you walk into a 3-star these days, as long as it's kept well, when you walk into a room, the room is decent enough, the washroom is decent enough. Those are the two basic things that you need in a hotel. But that's at the basic level. But what really changes is all the experiences that you add. Now, every time you add an experience, it's important that the experiences, besides, of course, engaging the guest, there are two things that you drive from experiences. One is a guest engagement, which doesn't have a defined value to it. But what you can really assess is that in case you're actually getting a lot of repeat business, which means the engagement that you have with the guest is working on. But obviously, there's the time that it will take to assess that, and for you to see that whether your amount that you've invested in that experience is being returned or not, it'll take some time. The other thing, of course, is direct returns that you see from the generation of revenue, right? So let us say that somebody comes up with an idea of having, the easiest, having a training session or a yoga session, hire a very skillful yoga instructor. So you know that you have paid, let us say, 5,000 to that yoga instructor for one session. Now you can completely analyze it against the number of participation that was there, what revenue was generated. So you can actually give a, you can actually assess, and you can come back to the operations department on helping them taking a decision on whether they should incur that cost or not incur that cost. And that's just a basic example. But when you talk about other experiences, other engagements, like one of the hotel chain, without naming it, they have an unsaid rule that for any guest recovery, any place where service goes wrong, or if you want to engage a guest, you can spend close to around $2,000 to recover any guest that has had an issue, or probably to engage a guest. Now, if everybody starts doing that, you know where the P&L will go, right? The P&L would be all red. But for you to assess, you need to have enough controls in place that even if that amount is spent in 1 out of 1,000 guests, in 1 out of 10,000 guests, whatever be the probability, it's justified. It's not just that somebody wanted to get a good TripAdvisor review, somebody wanted to get a good Google review, and they've just splurged on the guest. Because at the end of the day, if a guest is paying 10,000 rupees for a room and you give him a 5,000 complimentary stuff, obviously he will rate you, well on these social media platforms. But at the same time, and this is something that I've experienced in my 15 years of career, most of the time that a guest is engaged in hospitality, it's not because you ended up spending more on the guest. It was more because you got your basics right, and you had that emotional connect with the guest. You gave what he needed. You gave it at the right time, right? So, and that's what is most important, and for us in hospitality. And that's where operations really play a very key role, that it's not just about having fancy stuff around, it's more about getting the basics right. And going back to the data point that I was mentioning earlier, right now, the way we have designed the MIS, every time we design our MIS reporting structure, we design it in a way that it picks up any such anomalies. Wherever there is something which is out of the usual, it gets picked up. And that's where our control mechanism comes into play. And that's where finance, when we are designing the MIS, we really look at how the controls should be planned, that every time there is an anomaly, let us say that there is one person in the front desk who's continuously passing rebates after rebates. Now that gets popped up because there either is something genuine which needs to be investigated, or there might be something wrong that's happening, right? If you see that in the food and beverage in the restaurant, suddenly everything was fine, and suddenly you started seeing a lot of complimentaries, which means either, again, something has changed in the service delivery. There might be one fine day, something was not prepared well in the buffet. Now, if that was a popular dish, everybody would have a complaint for that. And you might then probably come up with a discount. You might come up with a service recovery, but there might be that there's something wrong that's happening. And if your data analysis picks up on those anomalies, it will become much more easier. Because right now, for a hotel, a 5-star hotel, you would probably have around 1,000 transactions every single day. And we all know, like I discussed, that payrolls have gone over the roof in India as well lately. So you cannot have somebody sitting there all the time looking at every transaction that, where was this 5 rupees rebated? Where was this 50 rupees rebated? Where was this 100 rupee rebated? What you really need is the system to do that for you and give you a refined report, which then you can act upon. So Instead of looking at 1000 transactions, it has already narrowed down your search to 50 transactions, and those are the only 50 that you need to look at. And that's where we play a key role, that the way we design a control, all of this gets picked up in the system rather than you manually getting involved and then finding out, what went wrong. So that's another key role that we play. And then lastly, if I talk about how the landscape of hospitality has changed and where our role has become even more important, is that if you look at how Indian hospitality industry has changed, it was more owner operated industry. So if you talk about all the old chains that we have, which have been in India for time immemorial, you talk about the Oberoi's, Taj, ITCs of the world, they were all initially operating on a model where they would own a hotel and they would themselves operate. But right now, what has changed is that the landscape has changed and there has been a differentiation between who owns a hotel and who operates a hotel. All the new chains that we see, Marriott you talk about, Hilton's you talk about, Hyatt's you talk about, they don't own hotels, they operate, they manage hotels, right? And so then what happens is that the stakeholders are different. You've got an operator who's also a stakeholder in the business, and you've got an owner who's also a stakeholder in the business, because at the end of the day, he's the one who's invested money, he's the one who needs return. At the same time, the operator also manages the hotel. They need to make sure that the hotel is run efficiently, there are returns. At the end of the day, the end result is the same, because both need the returns from the asset so that they can split between them and both of them can get their fair share. But there is a balance that needs to be maintained, and that's where we come in, because we in finance, we have a fiduciary responsibility both towards owners as well as operators when it comes to managing that kind of a setup where the owner is different from the operator. We need to make sure that we are absolutely fair, transparent. We strike a balance between what the owners want. We strike a balance between what the operators want. The operators would have their own standards, but those standards might be might not be manageable in terms of the expenses for the owners. So at the end of the day, we have to maintain that balance and make sure that if there are standards, the returns also come that ways. If you want a particular type of standard in terms of which cost money, your average rates that you're getting from your business or average rates that you're getting from the business by selling rooms is also getting you at the same level. If you talk about food and beverage, you have your recipes, that you're going to spend, you're going to use XYZ ingredients, which are going to cost you 500 rupees, which means that you need to at least price it at around 1500 rupees so that the owner gets the return on the 500 that he spent on those ingredients. So that balance is something that is important. And like I said, that if you really want a lot of foreign investment, that's where it becomes important that the returns that they're seeing. So at the end of the day, besides all the other things, it's the return that you're getting from the investment, which would drive the industry towards success when we talk about 2047, or even if we talk about 2024 for that case. Right? So that's primarily a brief of this one.
Lovely, lovely. I always considered finance as a very difficult subject, but you made it flow so easy, smooth, and transient. We could understand the entire, right from the construction, operation, and how, and something very nice, relevance of insurance, which you have brought today, is again something very important. MIS and owning it and operating it. These two elements also, which you emphasized very well. Sustainable hospitality, when you talk about, and payrolls and utilities, when you talk about. I'm going to say, you made the subject so simple so that a non-professional like me, who doesn't come from the finance background, could also understand how basically the whole flow part goes. What message would you like to give to younger generation today so that they prepare themselves for 2047 and they add value to tourism, hospitality, aviation, service industry, and all? What would you like to tell the younger generation?
All right. Thank you, first of all, for the appreciation. Like I said, that it's an honor and it's a pleasure to be sharing my insights with you and the rest of the industry. Now, younger generation, I think I'll probably take a leaf out of my own career history. I mentioned that I started off with Oberoi's as an industrial trainee. And when I look back at my career history, the biggest or the most important learnings that I had was during that 1 year of my industrial training. The reason was that I was not shy of working hard. I was not shy of what role am I playing. During that time, I played the role of receiving. I played the role of stores. I was the general cashier during that same 1 year because I was training. So I was taking these roles one by one. So I was general cashier. I was accounts payable. I was handling the tax returns. All these roles I was doing. And one thing that I did, I mean, I had already qualified my chartered accountancy by that time when I started my industrial training. I still remember that every week we used to get a supply, or every month we used to get a supply of packaged drinking water because it was a remote location. Every month, a truck full of packaged drinking water would come, or mineral water would come. I would go there, being part of receiving, I would unload the entire truck. So the message to the current generation is that if you really want to have a strong base, do not shy away from hard work. Smart work is needed, but the first step towards smart work is hard work, where you understand everything, you make your foundation strong. Do not shy away from asking questions. Do not shy away from really getting exposed to everything that you can in this industry, because this, for me, is one of the most versatile industry that you can work in. I keep telling in most of my sessions that you either have a retail industry, you have a manufacturing industry, and you have a service industry. Come to hotels, you've got all three together. You've got manufacturing happening in the kitchen, you've got retail when you're selling your rooms, you're selling your dishes in the restaurant, and you are a service industry because at the end of the day you're serving people. You cannot find a more versatile industry than hospitality. So if you really want to make a difference, make your foundation strong, work towards understanding the business, and that's where you start off.
Wow. 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 Great, Mr. Aman Malhotra. Such a lovely session. Splendid. You have added so much of value to today's session, and we are so grateful to you. Our deep gratitudes, thanks to you, and we look forward to seeing you moving up in the ladder, doing further better in life, and your Catron hospitality moving up from 57 projects in 12 countries. Let's touch further, more and more places, more and more countries, more and more properties, and we wish you all the grand success for coming days in future. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for sparing your most valuable time, and we look forward to have you with us